Some places have a voice, not one you can hear with your ears, but one that thrums in your bones, a low, persistent hum that follows you no matter how far you run. For me, that place is Blackwood Creek. I spent 10 years trying to drown out its call with the roar of the city, a desperate symphony of screeching tires, wailing sirens, and the anonymous murmur of a million strangers. My life in the city wasn't a career, it was an exorcism. I didn't move there, I fled to it. I built myself a fortress of concrete and noise, a steel cage 40 stories high where the air smelled of exhaust and hot asphalt, not damp earth and decay. I told myself the constant thrum of urban life was a sign of vitality, a pulse that proved I was alive and far away. But every night when the city lights painted flickering patterns on my ceiling, the silence of my apartment would let the old whispers in. The nightmares were always the same, not monsters or ghouls, but something worse, the feeling of home, the scent of wet leaves after a perpetual autumn rain. The unnerving stillness of water in a pool no one ever swam in. The oppressive weight of a sky so choked with pine trees that you could never see the stars. I'd wake up gasping, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the sterile air of my apartment suddenly thick with the ghost of my hometown's cloying breath. I was a man haunted by geography. I might have kept running forever, paying for my overpriced sanctuary with a job I hated, sustained by the flimsy belief that distance equaled safety. But then came the phone call. My mother, my last anchor to the world outside the creek's gravitational pull, was gone. The doctor's voice was a flat line, just like hers. It wasn't just grief that hit me. It was the sickening lurch of a ship whose final mooring has been cut. I was adrift. Her death was a catalyst in every sense. The modest life insurance policy she left behind evaporated in a matter of months, swallowed by debts I'd been ignoring and the cost of a life I could no longer afford. The city, once my shield, became a heartless machine of overdue notices and eviction warnings. Spiritually, I was already hollowed out. Financially, I was ruined. There was only one place left to go, the place I had built my entire adult life trying to escape. Returning to Blackwood Creek wasn't a homecoming, it was a surrender. The moment my beat-up sedan crossed the county line, the air changed. It grew heavy, thick with humidity and the smell of rot. Not an unpleasant smell exactly, but an ancient one. The smell of things slowly, patiently, being reclaimed by the earth. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't peaceful. It was a watchful, listening silence that pressed in on all sides, soaking up sound and leaving a vacuum in its place. The town didn't greet me. It consumed me. I couldn't even face the old house, not yet. The thought of stepping across that threshold felt like stepping into my own grave. Instead, I checked into the only motel on the edge of town, a dilapidated ruin called the Sleepy Pine. The name was a cruel joke. The neon sign buzzed like a trapped insect, casting a sickly green glow on the peeling paint and the rust-stained parking lot. My room is a shrine to forgotten things. A faded floral bedspread, a carpet with mysterious map-like stains, and a television that only gets one channel, a local station that seems to play nothing but static-laced reruns from a bygone era. Each day here feels like a year. The meager cash from selling my city furniture is dwindling, a shrinking pile of bills that marks the countdown to my complete and utter failure. But this despair is more than just financial. It's a deeper, more insidious dread. It's the feeling of sinking, with every sunrise that reveals the same gray, oppressive sky. I feel another piece of myself being scraped away, absorbed by the town's insatiable appetite. The fortress of noise I built for a decade has crumbled, and the hum of Blackwood Creek is no longer a distant whisper. It's a roar inside my head, a call I can no longer ignore. I ran so hard and for so long, only to end up right back where I started, trapped, broke, and listening to the silence of a place I'm beginning to fear I never truly left at all. This isn't a homecoming, it's a burial, and the dirt is already being shoveled. Desperation has a distinct rhythm. It's the slow drip of a leaky faucet in the dead of night, the whisper-thin crinkle of your last $20 bill, the relentless tick of a clock counting down to nothing. For a week I let that rhythm lull me into a state of paralysis in my dingy room at the Sleepy Pine. But even paralysis costs money. As the last of the daylight bled out of the sky, staining the clouds a bruised purple, I knew I couldn't hide any longer. I had to face the town. I had to face it. From my window I could see it emerge from the twilight, the Starlight Inn. It sat across the highway, a low-slung, sprawling building that had always looked out of place against the jagged backdrop of the pines. Its famous sign, a swooping arc of blue and white tubes, sputtered to life. It didn't glow, it twitched, a failing heartbeat pumping a pale, ghostly light into the growing darkness. To everyone else, it might have been a landmark. To me, it was a tombstone. Seeing it again ripped the scar tissue off a wound I thought had closed. The memory, fresh and cold as the day it happened, rose from the depths of my mind. I was 12. It was the suffocating peak of August. The kind of heat that makes the asphalt soft and the air shimmer. But the memory isn't of heat. It's of cold. An impossible, piercing cold that seemed to radiate from the door of the pool's pump room. They said my father, Daniel Holt, had been electrocuted. A faulty wire, a tragic accident. That was the story the sheriff told, the one the town whispered with sympathetic, downcast eyes. But I was there. I'd seen the men from the coroner's office carry him out on a stretcher, and even from a distance, I saw the look on their faces, a tight, strained horror that had nothing to do with a simple shock. Later, I overheard one of them talking to the sheriff in a low, hushed voice. His skin, it was like he'd been pulled from a frozen lake, not a burn on him. An electrical fault. The lie was as thick and suffocating as the summer air. Everyone in Blackwood Creek quietly accepted it, folding it into the town's collection of uncomfortable truths. It was easier than acknowledging the cold spot in the center of our town, the one that lingered long after they'd drained the pool and padlocked the pump room door. The lie broke my mother. Her grief wasn't the loud, keening sorrow of a widow. It was a quiet, gnawing terror that hollowed her out from the inside. She stopped driving past the inn, taking a 10-minute detour just to avoid the sight of it. At night, I'd hear her through the thin walls of our house, whispering his name in her sleep. Sometimes she'd mutter other things, fragments of a conversation I couldn't piece together. "The still water," she'd murmur, her voice tight with panic. "It watches, Ethan. It waits." She spoke of the Starlight Inn's pool not as a place, but as a presence. I shook the memories away, my breath fogging the grimy windowpane. My gaze drifted from the twitching sign down to the entrance. And there it was, taped to the inside of the glass door, a simple, handwritten sign illuminated by the bleak light of the lobby. Night clerk wanted. A wave of cold dread, colder than the memory of my father's death, washed over me. It felt less like an opportunity and more like a summons. The final piece of a puzzle I never wanted to solve clicking into place. Every choice, every failure, every step of my life had led me right here to this moment, staring at this sign, at the entrance to my family's mausoleum. The war inside me was brief and brutal. One part of my brain, the rational, terrified part, screamed at me to run. To pack my bag, sleep in my car, and drive until the gas tank was empty, even if it meant ending up on a street corner 1,000 miles away. But desperation is a powerful sedative. It numbs the instinct for self-preservation. My empty pockets and the gnawing hunger in my belly were more immediate threats than the ghosts of the past. Or so I told myself. The truth is, it didn't feel like a choice at all. It felt like gravity. Like being caught in a current, too tired to fight, simply letting it pull me toward the inevitable. I pushed myself away from the window, grabbed my thin jacket, and stepped out into the damp, chilling air. The buzzing of the Starlight sign grew louder with every step I took across the cracked asphalt, a siren's song luring me to the rocks. I didn't walk toward that door. I was pulled. A ghost returning to the scene of his haunting, about to ask the monster for a job. The glass door of the Starlight Inn opened with a soft, sighing whoosh of air, as if the building itself were exhaling. The lobby was a time capsule of neglect. A fine layer of dust coated everything, muting the already drab colors of the floral-patterned chairs and the threadbare carpet. The air was still and cool, heavy with the silence of a place long accustomed to being empty. Behind the long, dark wood counter, a single door was ajar, leaking a weak, jaundiced light into the gloom. That had to be the office. With each step, the feeling of being pulled intensified, the gravity of the place taking hold. I pushed the office door open. The air inside was a layered concoction of decay. The base note was the damp, earthy scent of mildew, a smell I knew intimately from the shadowed corners of my childhood home. Overlaid on that was the sharp, acrid ghost of stale cigarette smoke, ground into the very fibers of the room. But it was the third scent that made the hairs on my arms stand up, a faint, sickly sweet perfume, like flowers left to rot in their vase water. He was sitting behind a massive, imposing desk that took up most of the room, and I hadn't even seen him at first. He didn't emerge from a back room or turn in his chair. He simply seemed to coalesce from the deepest shadow in the corner, a figure carved from the darkness itself. He was impossibly tall and thin, folded into his chair like a desiccated insect. The suit he wore was dark and impeccably tailored, but in a style that seemed 50 years out of date. His skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over the sharp angles of his face, but it was his eyes that held me. They were dark, flat, and obsidian-like, and they didn't blink. Not once. As I stood frozen in the doorway, he watched me with the placid, patient intensity of a spider feeling the first tremor on its web. "You're here about the position," he said. His voice was a low, dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It wasn't a question. I found my own voice, a strained, thin thing. "Yes, sir. I saw the sign." I took a hesitant step forward, holding out the single, folded piece of paper I'd printed at the town library. My resume. It felt absurdly flimsy in my hand, a pathetic artifact from a world that didn't exist here. He made no move to take it. A slow smile spread across his face, but it was a horrifying thing to witness. It was a thin, bloodless gash that didn't touch his unblinking eyes. He looked at me not as a potential employee, but as an interesting specimen, a curiosity that had wandered into his lair. "Name?" The lie was on my lips before I even thought it through, a desperate, reflexive attempt to put some distance between me and my father. Ethan Smith." A low chuckle vibrated in his chest. It was a sound entirely devoid of humor. He leaned forward, the weak lamplight carving deep shadows under his cheekbones. "Blood always finds its way home in Blackwood Creek, Mr. Holt," he rasped, the name Holt landing like a physical blow. The cold that had washed over me outside the inn was nothing compared to this. This was a deep internal freeze, a shard of ice lodging itself in my heart. The room suddenly felt airless. He knew. Of course he knew. In a town this small, a lie like that was laughably transparent. But his tone wasn't one of simple recognition. It was dripping with a dark, ancient meaning, as if my very bloodline was a prerequisite for the job. He waved a long, slender-fingered hand at my resume. "I have no use for that," he stated, dismissing the last 10 years of my life with a single gesture. "Your history is irrelevant. Your experience is meaningless." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Then, what are you looking for?" His eyes seemed to bore right through me. "I don't need experience, Mr. Holt," he whispered, the sound now intimate and conspiratorial. "I need observance. I need a guardian." Guardian. The word hung on the rotting air between us, heavy and strange. A guardian of what? A rundown motel on a forgotten highway? The immediate job offer I had been praying for now felt like a curse. "The job is yours," he continued, leaning back into the shadows. "You start tonight." There was no discussion of pay, no mention of hours beyond the implicit night, no paperwork to sign. There was no relief in his words, only the chilling certainty of a trap snapping shut. I hadn't come here for an interview. I had come here to fulfill a destiny I didn't understand. By stepping into this office, by speaking to this man, this creature, I had just been bound to a pact whose terms were written in smoke and shadows. I accept, I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Mr. Alistair Rook's bloodless smile returned. Excellent. I knew you would. It wasn't praise, it was a statement of fact, a confirmation of the inevitable. I hadn't been hired, I'd been claimed. My acceptance hung in the stale air, an irrevocable vow I hadn't understood I was making. Mr. Rook gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of finality that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't offer a handshake or a welcoming word. The pact was sealed. Now came the sermon. He turned his attention from me to the monstrous desk, pulling open a wide, flat drawer with a sound of protesting wood. My relief, if it ever existed, was gone. In its place was a hollow, echoing dread, a certainty that I was about to be shown the fine print of the contract I had just signed with my soul. He lifted an object from the drawer and placed it on the desk between us with a soft, solid thud. It was a book, or at least it was shaped like one. A large, thick ledger bound in a material that was neither cloth nor leather. The cover was a pale, sallow color, and its surface was unnervingly smooth, with a strange, supple texture that yielded slightly under the pressure of Rook's spidery fingers. It was too soft, too resilient. As the weak light caught it, I could see an almost imperceptible pattern on its surface, like faded pores. The horrifying thought that it was made of skin, human skin, flashed through my mind, and I had to physically restrain myself from recoiling. Next to the ledger he placed a single pen. It was a simple, cheap-looking thing, the kind you'd find in a box of a dozen, except for its ink. The barrel was clear, showing a reservoir filled with a shockingly vibrant, crimson liquid. "You will make all your entries in this ledger with this pen," Rook said, his dry voice dropping to a near whisper. He tapped the pen with a long fingernail, producing a sharp click. "This color is important," he breathed, his unblinking gaze fixed on me. "It can see." I just stared, my mind struggling to process the cryptic statement. It can see? He opened the unsettling ledger. The pages were yellowed and brittle with age, filled with columns of spidery handwriting, all in the same jarring red. He turned to the first blank page, the clean slate for the Starlight Inn's newest guardian. "There are rules, Mr. Holt," he continued, his tone that of a priest initiating an acolyte into a dark and ancient order. "Not many, but they are absolute. They are not to be debated, questioned, or broken. Your survival depends on your obedience." He didn't read them from a list. He recited them from memory, his voice a steady, chilling monotone. Rule 1. The pool lights must be turned off no later than 10 p.m. every night. Rule 2. No one, under any circumstances, is permitted near the pool between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. These are the hours of observance. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. My mind raced back to the lie told about my father, an accident. But what if he had broken a rule? Rule 3, Rook went on, his voice dropping lower. If the underwater lights in the pool turn on by themselves, you will log the exact time in the ledger. Then, you will draw a circle around the entry. The circle must be drawn in one unbroken line. Why? A ward? A warning? My throat felt tight. Rule 4. If you see anyone swimming in the pool during those hours, you will not approach them. You will not make your presence known. You will return to this office, lock the door, and pick up the telephone. You will dial extension 241. You will hear exactly 3 deep, resonant chimes, as if ringing from underwater. After the 3rd chime, you will hang up. You will not speak. A cold sweat broke out on my brow. The specificity of the instruction was terrifying. Who was I calling? What was I signaling? Rule 5. You will never remove anything from the pool. Not leaves, not debris. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes like pits. And especially, not hair. Whatever the water claims, It keeps. Hair. The word conjured a grotesque image of long, dark strands snagged on a filter grate, waving gently in the current. Whose hair? He saved the most dreadful for last. And finally, Rule 7. If the water in the pool turns ink black, so dark it absorbs the light, you will leave the property immediately. Do not hesitate. Do not pack a bag. Do not call the police. You will call the single phone number that is carved into the underside of this desk. Then you will run. I couldn't help it. The questions burst out of me, a torrent of fear and confusion. Why? What are these rules for? What's in the pool? What am I a guardian of? Mr. Rook's thin smile returned, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. He rose from his chair, a towering silhouette against the dim light. His reply was a death sentence to my curiosity, a final slamming of a door I never knew was open. The reasons, he said, his voice flat and absolute, are not for the guardian to know, only the duty. And with that, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving me alone with the skin-bound ledger, the seeing pen, and a set of commandments that promised a swift and terrible punishment for any transgression. I was no longer just a night clerk. I was a keeper of secrets I wasn't allowed to understand, a warden for a prison I couldn't see. The soft click of the lobby door shutting behind Mr. Rook was the loudest sound I had ever heard. And then, the silence that rushed in to fill the void wasn't empty. It was dense, weighted, as if the air itself had gained substance. The faint hum from the ancient beverage cooler behind the counter died with a pathetic gurgle, plunging the room into a profound quiet. This was the listening silence my gut had warned me about. I sat perfectly still in the creaking chair, feeling like a field mouse that has just heard the shadow of a hawk pass overhead. Every nerve ending was on fire, straining to interpret the stillness. It felt like a held breath, a pause before a predator's strike. My eyes kept darting to the clock on the wall. Its hands didn't sweep, they lurched, each tick of the second hand a tiny, sharp impact against the oppressive quiet. 9:45 p.m., time to prepare for the first ritual. Leaving the dubious sanctuary of the office was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The hallway leading to the back exit was a tunnel of gloom, and the air grew colder with every step, a distinct and unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the night temperature. It was a damp, deep cold, the kind that seems to emanate from stone and earth. I pushed open the back door and stepped out into the pool area. The single security lamp mounted on the side of the building cast a sick, yellow-white light over the scene, creating more shadows than it dispelled. The light was a liar. It illuminated the cracked concrete patio and the sad, white plastic lounge chairs, but it distorted them, stretching their forms into long, skeletal specters. The shadows of the pine trees that ringed the property weren't just shadows. They were pools of absolute blackness, writhing at the edges of my vision as if they were alive. My own shadow was a grotesque parody, a spindly, elongated figure that clung to my heels one moment and stretched out to touch the pool's edge the next. The walk to the maintenance housing where the light controls were located felt like a mile. The gravel under my worn sneakers crunched with a sound that was obscenely loud, like brittle bones snapping in the stillness. I found the control box on the wall. Inside was a single, heavy-duty toggle switch, its black plastic casing cool and greasy to the touch. The clock on my phone read 9:59. I waited, my heart hammering a frantic beat against my ribs, my breath pluming in the cold air. As the numbers flipped to 10 o'clock, I reached out and flipped the switch. The click echoed unnaturally in the night. The underwater lights in the pool didn't just go out. They were extinguished, snuffed out in an instant. The effect was immediate and breathtakingly awful. The pool, which had been a basin of placid, chemically blue water, transformed into a perfect rectangle of blackness. It was a hole in the world, a bottomless void that seemed to drink the weak light from the security lamp, offering no reflection, no hint of depth. It was a gaping mouth, and I felt a dizzying, primal urge to step away from its edge, terrified it might pull me in. My mother's words echoed in my head. The still water. It watches. I stumbled back to the office, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. I locked the door behind me, the sound of the bolt sliding home offering a sliver of comfort. The silence in here felt different now, no longer just listening, but expectant. I sat at the desk, the skin-bound ledger open before me. I uncapped the crimson pen. My hand trembled as I brought the nib to the page. The yellowed paper seemed to thirst for the ink. I made my first entry, my handwriting a spidery, terrified scrawl. 10 p.m. pool lights off. The red ink was shockingly bright against the aged page. It wasn't just a color, it was a statement. It looked vivid and alive, a fresh wound on ancient flesh. I stared at the 5 simple words I had written, and a horrifying realization settled in my soul. This was not a logbook, this was a testament. And I had just made my first offering. The first hour of my vigil passed in a state of suspended animation. I sat in Mr. Rook's worn chair, my eyes glued to the security monitor that showed only a grainy black and white image of the void-like pool. The listening silence of the office pressed in, and I felt a growing, desperate need to do something. Anything to break the spell. The inaction was a form of torture, letting my imagination populate the darkness outside with the horrors the rules only hinted at. My gaze fell upon the monstrous desk. It was a fortress of secrets. Mr. Rook had only opened the one drawer. My fingers twitched with a nervous energy that was part fear, part compulsion. I needed to know more. I needed an anchor, a piece of context, something to prove I wasn't just going insane. I started with the drawers on the left. They were filled with mundane office supplies from a forgotten decade. Dried-up ink pads, brittle rubber bands that snapped at a touch, boxes of paperclips fused together by rust. The bottom drawer on the right, however, was stuck fast. It was warped, as if from some long-ago spill, and refused to budge. I braced my feet and gave it a hard, desperate yank. It came free with a groaning screech of wood against wood, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent office. The contents were sparse. A few yellowed invoices, a cracked coffee mug, and in the very back, a small, tightly wadded ball of paper. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. It looked like trash, but there was an intentionality to how it had been crushed, a frantic energy still palpable in its folds. My fingers, trembling slightly, worked to smooth it out on the desk. The paper was stiff and fragile, and as it uncreased, I saw the dark brownish-red patches that stained it. They weren't ink, they were stiff, flaking, and had a faint coppery scent that made my stomach clench. The words weren't written. They were scratched into the paper, carved with such furious pressure that the writing was as much an engraving as it was a message. The author must have used a sharpened object, a desperate improvisation. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat as I deciphered the frantic scrawl. To whoever is next. The words were a direct address from a ghost. This isn't a joke, don't try to understand it. My father was wrong, I was wrong. It wasn't an accident. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, pierced through me. My own father, the pump room, the accepted lie. This person, this ghost, was walking a path I was just beginning. It's waiting, don't look at. The message ended there, not just stopped, but terminated. The last word was followed by a long, violent scratch that tore straight through the fragile paper, a final, voiceless scream recorded in a physical act. I could almost see it, a hand frantically scratching out a warning, only to be dragged away mid-thought, the instrument of their writing gouging a deep wound across their last testament. My mind was reeling. Who was this? When did this happen? My eyes shot to the skin-bound ledger sitting ominously on the desk. I fumbled it open, my hands clumsy with a newfound terror. I flipped back from my own lonely entry, past the empty pages. The last sign of life was dated 2 weeks ago. For several nights, the entries were routine, just like mine. 10 p.m. pool lights off. Then I found it, the final entry. It was written under a date exactly 2 weeks prior. The time was 2:17 a.m. The words, scratched in the same frantic hand as the note, were simple, lights on, but it was what surrounded the words that made my blood run cold. Following Rule 3, the entry was circled, but not once. It was circled dozens of times, a chaotic, overlapping spiral of crimson ink. The author had pressed down with inhuman force, the pen digging deeper and deeper with each revolution, shredding the yellowed paper until the center was a mangled, ink-soaked tear. It wasn't the mark of someone following a rule. It was the mark of someone screaming on paper, a sign of abject, mind-shattering panic. 2 weeks, the gap in the ledger, the crumpled, bloodied note, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. I wasn't the replacement for an employee who had quit. I was the successor to a victim. The Starlight Inn didn't have a high turnover rate. It had a body count. The job wasn't open because someone left. It was open because someone was taken. And I was next. The discovery of the note and the savaged ledger entry shattered the last of my composure. The listening silence of the office was no longer just unnerving. It was predatory. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of wind in the pines outside, was a potential threat. I was a tethered animal, staked out in the dark, waiting for the monster to come. I spent the next hour jumping at shadows, my gaze flicking between the black void on the security monitor and the shredded warning on the desk. Just when I thought the suffocating quiet would drive me mad, the bell above the lobby door chimed softly. The sound, so normal and mundane, was jarringly out of place in the charged atmosphere. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Who would be checking into a motel at this hour? A young couple stepped into the lobby, their movements strangely synchronized. They were handsome, almost unnaturally so, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. They looked like they had stepped out of a vintage photograph. Their clothes, a simple dress for her, a button-down shirt for him, immaculate, but subtly out of style. "We'd like a room," the man said, his voice smooth and placid. I tried to compose myself, to play the part of a normal night clerk. "Of course, just for the one night?" "That's all we'll need," the woman added, her voice a soft, melodic echo of his. As they stepped closer to the counter, I saw their eyes. They were both the same, a deep, uniform black, like pools of ink without any discernible pupil or iris. They weren't just dark, they seemed to drink the light, giving back nothing. An instinctive, primal alarm bell screamed in the back of my mind. I fumbled with the registration card, my hands slick with a cold sweat. As the man signed his name, a generic John Smith in a flawless, looping script, the woman's gaze drifted past me toward the back door that led to the pool area. "The pool looks so inviting," she murmured, a faint, wistful smile on her lips. "Is it open for a late-night swim?" Rule 2 slammed into the forefront of my mind, absolute and inviolable. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "The pool is closed for maintenance." "It's closed until morning." They didn't look disappointed. They didn't argue. They simply turned to each other and exchanged a slow, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a conspiratorial smirk, a shared secret I was not privy to. It was the look of predators who knew they could afford to be patient. "A shame," the man said smoothly, taking the key from my trembling hand. "We'll see you in the morning." They walked down the hall, their footsteps making no sound on the threadbare carpet. I watched them go, a feeling of profound wrongness settling deep in my gut. Before the dread could fully take root, it was shattered by another sound, the shrill ring of the office telephone. It was so sudden and loud it made me cry out. The phone was an ancient rotary model, and its ring was a harsh, insistent clamor. My hand shook as I picked up the heavy receiver. "Starlight Inn, this is Ethan." There was no voice on the other end, only a sound, a wet, choking, gurgling noise like someone trying to draw a breath with lungs full of water. It was a desperate, drowning sound, punctuated by soft, liquid pops. It was intimate and horrifyingly clear, as if the person making it were standing right next to me. I held the receiver away from my ear, my stomach churning. I didn't hang up. I was paralyzed, listening to the final, agonizing moments of a person's life. The sound lasted for exactly 30 seconds. I know because my eyes were locked on the lurching second hand of the wall clock, and then it cut out with an abrupt click, replaced by the dead air of the dial tone. I slammed the phone down, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room felt colder, the air thicker. My senses were under assault. From the empty corridor where the strange couple had disappeared, I heard the faint, phantom giggle of a child, a sound that vanished the moment I focused on it. Then, a sudden, overwhelming wave of scent flooded the small office. Not the mildew and rot, but the chemical sting of chlorine mixed with the thick, organic odor of pond scum and stagnant water. It was so powerful it made my eyes water. And just as quickly as it arrived, it was gone, leaving only the stale, dead air behind. The Starlight Inn was waking up. The uninvited guests weren't just the couple with the black eyes. The spirits of this place, the things bound to the water, were beginning to stir, and I was the only one here to witness it. The hands on the wall clock crept toward 2 a.m. with a torturous slowness. Each lurch of the second hand was a small explosion in the crushing silence. A drumbeat counting down to a moment I was beginning to dread more than death itself. The strange couple was gone. The phantom sounds had faded, but the aftermath lingered, a residue of wrongness that coated every surface in the office. I sat in the clammy vinyl chair, a prisoner awaiting his sentence. The crumpled note and the skin-bound ledger lay on the desk before me, two pieces of a terrifying puzzle that were finally, horribly, beginning to fit together. The disparate horrors of the night, Mr. Rook's cryptic words, the impossible rules, the gurgling phone call, my own fractured memories, began to swirl and connect in my mind, coalescing into a single monstrous truth. Mr. Rook didn't need a night clerk. He had said it himself. I need a guardian, a guardian. The word replayed in my head, its meaning shifting from something protective to something sacrificial. You don't guard a motel. You guard a prison. You guard a tomb. And the rules, they weren't corporate policies. They were the commandments of a dark ritual. Log the time, draw an unbroken circle. Not a note, but an act of warding. Call extension 241, listen for 3 chimes. Not a report to a manager, but a signal to something else, an alert that the offering was being observed. Never remove anything from the pool. Not a rule of cleanliness, but a decree. What the water takes, the water keeps. It wasn't a pool, it was an altar. My father. The impossible, biting cold of his body on that sweltering August day. The lie of the electrical fault that everyone in town had swallowed like a bitter pill. He hadn't died in an accident. He had been the guardian before me. He had been on this same vigil in this same chair watching that same black water. And he had failed. He had broken a rule, or perhaps the rules had simply not been enough. I was not an employee, I was a successor. A replacement in a long, unseen lineage of Holt men. Chosen by blood. Mr. Rook's words echoed with chilling clarity. Blood always finds its way home in Blackwood Creek. He hadn't been making a folksy observation. He had been stating a job requirement. The Starlight Inn didn't need my resume. It needed my bloodline. It needed another warden to sit watch, to perform the rituals, to keep whatever slumbered in the depths of that pool placated. I wasn't here to earn a paycheck. I was here to be the next sacrifice on the schedule. My gaze drifted from the ledger to the dark computer monitor on the desk. The screen was a black, reflective mirror, a pool of its own. For a split second, I saw my own reflection staring back, but it wasn't me. Not the me sitting here now, anyway. The face in the screen was pale, its skin translucent and waterlogged, stretched tight over my skull. My hair was dark and plastered to my forehead. But it was the eyes that stopped my heart. They were my eyes, but they were wide, fixed, and filled with a silent, unending terror, the look of a man who had seen the abyss right before it swallowed him whole. It was a premonition, a glimpse of my fate should I fail this night's watch. It was what was waiting for me. The horrifying vision vanished, leaving only my own terrified face staring back from the dark glass. I tore my eyes away, my breath catching in a ragged sob. I looked at the clock. 1:57 a.m., 3 minutes. 3 minutes until the time of the previous Guardian's final, panicked entry. The air in the office was thick and heavy, vibrating with an unseen energy, as if the entire world were holding its breath. I braced myself, my entire being focused on the security monitor, waiting for the underwater lights to snap on, for the moment of judgment to arrive. But it didn't wait. From the speakers connected to the outdoor microphone, a single, sharp sound cut through the silence. Splash! It was clean, distinct, and utterly unambiguous. Not the gentle lapping of water, but the sound of something sizable entering the pool. It was still minutes before 2 a.m. Something had grown impatient.